Hi, I'm Michelle Shingler, Editor-in-Chief of Foreword Reviews. Thank you for tuning into Petit Forward, our bite-sized interviews with indie authors. Today we're talking to cultural historian Nancy Marie Brown, whose latest book, Looking for the Hidden Folk, is a mischievous guide to reclaiming sacred connections to places as a way of sparking environmentalist commitments. Nancy, thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
You're welcome. It's nice to be here.
Your book begins with an unusual environmentalist triumph, an elf seer mitigating the destruction of a portion of a lava field with an appeal on behalf of its elfin sites. Why do you think this particular tactic succeeded when so many others had failed?
I like to joke that this book was a collection of travel essays and then it got hijacked by the elves. I visited Iceland over 30 times since 1986, and I had begun writing several of these chapters as standalone essays based on my travel journals. And then I met the elf seer, Ragnhildur Jónsdóttir, and I learned how she and the elves had saved a beautiful natural area, the lava field of Gálgahraun, which is near the city of Reykjavik. And after meeting Ragnhildur, I realized that all the essays that I had in mind for this book had the same theme, and that was that Icelanders see nature in a different way than I had been brought up to see it, and that their way felt to me much richer and more satisfying. Traveling in Iceland, I felt more alive, more open to wonder and beauty. And I realized it was because to the Icelanders I met and traveled with, the world around us is alive. It's inhabited by elves for some, but also by stories. We talk about a person's life story, but in Iceland, places have their own life stories. And these stories tell not only of people who lived there 100 or 1,000 years ago, but of plants and animals and birds and volcanic eruptions and floods and ice flows and supernatural beings too, like trolls and giants and elves. And I realized, or I learned, that these supernatural beings can appear in different shapes depending on who is telling the story, but they're all nature spirits. They are guardians of the land. So in the stories that Ragnhildur told of the lava field, she described the elves as little people wearing pointy hats who had kitchens and sofas and churches inside the rocks in this lava field. But she also was pointing out the beautiful mosses and flowers that grew in the lava field. And she asked the construction workers to listen to the sound of the wind in the grasses and the cries of the seagulls. She was teaching them to pay attention to the beauty of the ordinary, everyday world and to take responsibility for destroying that beauty. It's also important to point out that she was not trying to stop all development. She was asking for a compromise, for balance between the efficiency of the new road and the inspiration that can be found in a beautiful landscape. And I think that's what made the difference.
In discussing scientific theories, including Einstein's theory of relativity, you point out that much of what we understand about the world and much of what we believe is taken on the merit of other people's expertise and experiences. How does this also apply to the arena of folklore and to the stories we tell ourselves about the natural world?
Well, the scientific discussions in this book also came as a big surprise to me. I suppose I should have expected it since I began my career as a science writer, and many of my other books also include some science. But I was reading a review, a book on Icelandic folklore, and the reviewer said something like, Icelanders don't believe in elves the same way they believe in gravity. And that just stopped me cold. How do Icelanders believe in gravity? I mean, how do I believe in gravity? Do I believe, for example, as Einstein's theories say, that time travel is possible? So that got me going, and I investigated quantum mechanics and cosmology and cognitive science and psychology and anthropology and biology and philosophy and theology. I was just reading really widely and trying to answer questions like, what does it mean to believe? Do we really know what people in different cultures mean by that word? And what do we mean when we say something is real? For example, is money real? And then how do our senses work? How do we see? So each discipline I found defines and redefines what is real and unreal, natural and supernatural, demonstrated and theoretical, alive and inert. And each one has its own way of perceiving and valuing or not valuing the world around us. What I learned was that our view of the natural world is shaped by our experiences and our expectations, by what we've been taught and what we've read, essentially by the stories we've been told. And those stories are very powerful. The stories we tell about the natural world are what inspire us to preserve it or encourage us to destroy it.
As a once visitor to Helgafell myself, I was fascinated to read your chapter on the Hill. You discuss Helgafell's centrality to the sagas and to the Christianization of Iceland. Over your 30 plus years in visiting that space, what's been your greatest takeaway?
Again, I'd have to say it's the power of stories, both the stories we tell about the place and those we choose not to tell. The name Helgafell, it means holy mountain. The hill itself is the plug of an old volcano, essentially a volcano's heart. According to the Icelandic sagas, it was named in the late 800s by settlers from Norway who believed they would go into the hill when they died. As the saga tells us, when some of them drowned on a fishing trip, somebody at Helgafell saw the whole north side of the hill open up. The god Thor was holding a feast inside at a splendid feast hall, and the drowned men were welcomed to the table and given mead to drink. I always have that picture in my mind when I go to Helgafell of the Thor holding his feast inside the hill. But Helgafell was the first place I fell in love with in Iceland. It was June 1986, and there was an inch of snow outside of our tent that morning. And my husband and I backpacked from the nearest town, about 4 miles. In my journal, I remember I reduced the walk to rain, bones, sheep dung, mud, and some birds. And it turns out that the birds were the most important because I cemented a friendship with the family that lived on the farm beneath the hill by finding a raven's nest that they had been looking for. Because in Icelandic folklore, ravens bring you good luck. 2 of them watch over every Icelandic farm. They are also the god Odin's birds. 2 of them sit on his shoulders, named Thought and Memory, which I think is really poignant. So I was drawn to Helgafell by stories in the medieval sagas, but I was drawn back again and again by stories that I created myself by visiting the family there. And I remember what anthropologist Tim Ingold says about places, that each path we travel on from place to place is a thread, and each place is a knot, and the knot is of stories.
Yeah, that's lovely. So you discuss the power of stories in binding us together into a sense of place. If you can encourage those who are ambivalent about our responsibilities toward the earth to read one story or novel that you think might sway them toward more care, what would you choose?
I was thinking about this question, and I realized that a critic once said that I like to come at my subjects sideways. So my choice here might not seem obvious. I mean, there's a whole lot of books that I quote in Looking for the Hidden Folk. And the one I'm going to recommend is not probably the one that you would think would be on the top of my list. It's a book that many people have already read and loved. It's The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien is the writer who has most inspired my own work, and his elves are most like the elves of Icelandic folklore. But I'm recommending The Lord of the Rings not because of the elves, but because of the theme that the elves present, which is of the beauty and mystery of the natural world and its fragility in the face of greed and a lust for power. And our role as humans is analogous to that of the hobbits in the stories, the protectors and the lovers of all that's green and growing.
You also write that the novel, the change, the arrestingly strange, these are the keys not only to seeing, but to remembering. They are the tools that the myth makers use to teach us what not to forget. What's an Icelandic site that you can hold onto and return to always remember that we have responsibilities toward the world around us?
Well, I have literally thousands of photographs of beautiful and strange Icelandic sites. But the one that I hold on to is one that I saw and recorded without a camera. And that was the summer that I took a long horseback ride through the center of Iceland across the black sand desert between the high glaciers. And one night when I was jotting notes in my journal in our cabin, it's like I felt eyes on my neck, and I turned around to see the glacier outside the window, and it stretched like across all three windows. And I looked it up. Here's how I describe it in the book: like an intelligence looming between earth and sky, gleaming yellow white, unlike anything real, brilliant, misshapen, awake, a rising moon in wintertime, its edges blurred and shifting. It seemed to breathe. It drew me outside. But I walked dead away from it, I wrote, and I went wading in the warm shallows of the river, and somehow I managed to get turned all the way around. And when I looked up again, the glacier was right in my face. As I described it, wings of black cloud rising behind the ice warned me that the fine weather wouldn't last. But how long did I have? There was no scale here. I could not guess how far or how high that ice cap was. So I decided to turn back, but when I hauled myself up the high grassy bank of the river, startling some geese and their goslings, I saw nothing at all around me but river, mountains, ice, and sky. No hut, no horses, no signs of human life, as if I'd stepped through a door into another world. And that was a feeling I've never forgotten, a feeling that really brought home to me how insignificant I really was, and how vast and timeless and beautiful the earth could be.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So everyone should pick up Looking for the Hidden Folk. It's a wonderful book. It's out from Pegasus. And it was wonderful speaking with you, Nancy. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thanks a lot, Michelle.